Good morning, everyone. My name is Abby Maxman. I am the president and CEO of Oxfam America, and I am thrilled to be here today with Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota, one of the founding co-chairs of the IFI Education Caucus. We know some of you may have been expecting Congressman John Rutherford as well from Florida. He's unable to join this morning, but on behalf of the IFI working group, I want to welcome Congressman Phillips here on this busy Monday morning, and thank you for being with us today. Congressman, as you know, millions of people in East Africa are facing famine-like conditions after an unprecedented 4 consecutive failed rainy seasons in parts of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. And we know the ongoing Ukraine conflict has compounded the region's already dire hunger crises, sending food prices skyrocketing to an all-time high. And once again, we all know it is the poorest and most vulnerable people who are being hardest hit and fastest. I just returned from Somaliland last week, a region I've spent more than half of my 30-year career. And there I met with a number of women, all sharing similar stories. This one person I'll mention here, Safia, who is a 38-year-old divorced mother of 8 children who lost over 90% of her livestock over the past year, having stayed as long as she could in her community until it was unsafe to stay, as literally hyenas were circling her home at night and forced her to make. Sorry, Congressman, can you hear me okay? Great. So as we know, the stories of pastoralist communities across East Africa, I met with many last week, and we're seeing the repeated patterns of what's happening to people across the region and around the world. And since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, IFIs have played such a vital role in responding to these compounding crises, mobilizing record levels of resources, the U.S. playing such a vital role in these institutions to ensure they live up to strong standards when it comes to transparency, accountability, and development effectiveness. But we know more resources are needed and urgent action is required to address what we see is happening. And we hope to continue to see the IFI step up to meet the moment. So turning to the new caucus that we're launching today, there are a number of congressional caucuses that aim to improve U.S. foreign assistance and strengthen its role in global development. But Congressman Phillips, I know we only have a little bit of your time this morning. Can you comment, how will the launch of this caucus contribute to the role the U.S. has historically played in the IFIs? And how do you see the caucus playing a role in educating other members about the role that IFIs are playing and should play in the current hunger crisis? Over to you, Congressman.
Well, thank you, Abby. Thank you so much to you and the work you do, and to all of our wonderful panelists and everybody joining today. I'm grateful to all of you. And Representative Rutherford and I started the IFI Education Caucus to help educate both our fellow colleagues and staff members on Capitol Hill about the importance of IFIs and Washington's role in multilateral aid institutions as we try to address famine. Abby, you just spoke to some of the horrifying numbers and circumstances from Africa to now Pakistan and so much of the world. And we can't sit by idly. And I'm thrilled that there's no partisanship here. This is only about humanity. And our objective is to convene, create spaces and places to have these conversations, to bring the best and brightest, all of you among them, together to share ideas with us, to elevate the profile of the IFIs doing good work and the organizations doing good work around the world. And most of all, helping educate us as well as to what we need to know, who we need to inspire, and what policies and pursuits we need to undertake. So I just want to say thank you. I'm grateful to all of you for your life's work and working with us to both spread the good word and educate all the representatives and staff members. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Phillips, and for being here. I know your time is tight today, but your presence is so meaningful. Could you take a few minutes before you to drop off to outline what your top priorities are as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, particularly with respect to hunger and food crises we're witnessing around the world?
My My priorities in this area on the Foreign Affairs Committee are to ensure that the dollars that we invest, and I use that word intentionally, not just share or contribute, but invest, because on investments we expect returns. And I don't think we've done a very good job in the past of measuring those returns. And that means looking more broadly for those doing good work, identifying the most effective, efficient means of using our foreign aid resources. And that's not just as it relates to food insecurity and famine, but as it relates to our immigration policies and international security initiatives, and building friendships and relationships that our country needs for its national security. And partisanship has gotten in the way of way too much. My mission in Congress, both on foreign affairs and every other committee on which I serve, is to bring people together and do what we're doing today, which is to set aside politics in the spirit of principle and identify solutions, and be more expedient and effective in the work we do. And my learning curve is steep, and that's why I'm also here to learn. And I just, again, want to thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. If you have one more minute, can we hear from you? Last week, the Global Food Security Act passed out of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. How will the Global Food Security Act and Feed the Future initiative led by USAID complement IFI efforts to address growing global hunger, in your view?
Well, policy, we did the easy part. I think that's the most important message today is, passing a bill from out of committee or even through the House into the Senate and signed into law. That's the relative easy part. It's the implementation that matters. And that's why the collaboration between the public entities and NGOs, the financing, the human elements, how it is implemented together is where the rubber hits the road, if you will. And that's what we have to pay attention to. I think too often, and this goes back to your earlier question, Abby, too often we pass legislation and then wipe our hands and move on to something else without any retrospect, assessment, or accountability. So the proof is going to be in the pudding. And part of the establishment of this caucus is to ensure that it is ongoing, that it is not in the past, rather it's still prospective, and that we do better and frankly engage more of our allies around the world to join us in this important work. We can't do it alone, can't do it unilaterally, have got to work with others. And I like to think that addressing famine could be actually a foundation for peace, more peace around the world, and less conflict. That's one of my aspirations as well.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear. We know the U.S.'s role in providing global leadership is vital. And as Oxfam, we have so appreciated the role of Congress over the years in providing the strong support, as well as oversight of U.S. engagement in the IFIs. And we really see the launch of this caucus and your leadership as vital to strengthening the understanding and awareness of the role the IFIs play in international development. And we so look forward and stand ready to continue working with you, Congressman, on this important effort, and appreciate your visionary leadership in promoting awareness of the IFIs and the important work of these institutions. I know you have to run, but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning and for your leadership.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you all so much. I know it'll be a spirited conversation, and my associate Ryan Houlihan will be staying on and apprising me of the conversation afterwards. And thank you once again. We'll be in touch and keep the faith, and I'll see you all again soon.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. So now we're a few minutes ahead. I think some of you know we're turning to a part 2 of today's panel. Because my own tech is a little limited this morning. We know that tech issues happen when you're least expecting them. So I can't see if our panelists are on yet. And I think they're about to turn on their videos. As soon as they do, I might need someone to chat me because I might not see them. There we go. Well, I don't have the visibility, but I am delighted to hear and that we have today with us representatives from 2 of the institutions that are just so critical to this conversation. I think everyone who's on the call knows the World Bank and IFAD on how they're addressing the current crises. So first, we will hear from Samuel Maimbo. He's the head of resource mobilization at the International Development Association, which I'm sure many of you know is the World Bank's fund for low-income countries. And we also have Thoraya Triki, who is the Director of IFAD's Sustainable Production Markets and Institutions Division. Warm welcome to you both. It's just great to have you with us on this Monday morning to get into this conversation. And just by way of background, as you both know, as we all know, the crisis in East Africa is dire. It's one example amongst many where one person every 48 seconds is estimated to be dying from hunger in drought-ravaged Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia, where I was last week, and nearly 2/3 of the total population of South Sudan are currently experiencing crisis levels of hunger. And in Somalia, those classifications, many of you know IPC, we see there are risks now of famine imminent, projecting over 100,000 people facing famine, and then even more, substantially more famine-like conditions, and the risk growing every day. And the current crisis in East Africa is the result of this confluence of factors, including higher food prices driven by the conflict in Ukraine. So I'll first turn to Sam. If you can kick us off to tell us, how is your institution responding?
Well, thank you very much for this invitation to join this session. As you rightly pointed out at the onset, I have the privilege of working with IDA, and our role there is to mobilize as much concessional finance as we can for 74 of the poorest countries around the world. Now, that covers about 2.5 billion people, a billion of which are already living under $2 a day. And so we are sadly quite familiar with dealing with crises of this nature. And I think one of the things that I'd like to highlight before specifically focusing on the present crisis is that over time, with the support of a number of shareholders, the US no less, one of the most important ones we have, is to really make sure that the World Bank is able to respond with 4 critical elements to every crisis, and this is the same. One is to really build on our country-driven model. I think given the way crises have continued to evolve, the more we can find local solutions to some of these crises, the better. The more we can source resources and food locally, the more we can build and invest in some resilience at the local level, the better. So I think making sure that we continue to reinvest in a country-driven model is how we've responded to this crisis as well. The second, ultimately, is about bringing as much financial resources as we can. I fully agree with the congressman when he uses the word invest, because it is right. We don't have the luxury of a bottomless pit of resources. So we need to make sure that whenever we are deploying resources, we're doing so in such a way that in future we can come back with less resources if we have to. And so we work very hard to make sure that for every dollar of donor assistance that we can get, we're able to leverage this with $3 additional by going to the market and making sure that we're providing these resources as strongly as we possibly can. The third factor that I think is really important is about leveraging the bank's global expertise. There is no reason today that we are surprised by famine, in the sense that we have the technology today to foresee regions of this world which will be hit by drought 6 months from now. And so making sure that we're bringing this technology to present crisis is really important. And the fourth and last point I'll say in this sort of introductory setting is simply that one of the things we constantly have to be aware of is this struggle between present crisis and future crisis. So even as we deal with the present famine and present drought that we're dealing with, is keeping a close eye to the longer term development challenges. Climate, for example, is one, but then also debt vulnerability. There are other structural issues such as human capital development. There's a youth bulge in the region that is critical. So making sure that we are balancing these two is important. So that's how I would frame the bank's response, and I'm happy to get into the specific present crisis after later in the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sam. Really, that for those four pillars: local solutions, investing the resources, leveraging the global expertise, not being surprised. We know anticipatory action mechanisms are there. We need to use them better, and this present and future. We have to deal with the problems of today and prevent the future ones of tomorrow. So that was really great to hear you tee those up. Let me turn to Thoraya now, and we'll hear also how IFAD is responding, and then we'll come back to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Abby, for the invitation and the opportunity to speak. A very good question, and speaking after Sam was very eloquent is always a challenge. Maybe I would like to start my intervention by reminding that while food security is becoming very high on the agenda because of the ongoing crisis, it has been the top priority for IFAD for 40 years, because actually we were created in the 70s to address a food crisis. So our mandate has never been as relevant as today. So the way that we were created both as a UN specialized agency focusing on agriculture, and particularly on a very underserved market segment, which is small producer and rural poor, who are active in food systems. At the same time, we are at an IFI, so borrowing again the words of Congressman Phillips, we are in the business of investing and supporting investment and leveraging financing for development and support of producer and rural poor. So going back to our intervention, I think our approach has been quite similar. So we have been trying to leverage the different tools that IFAD has its own. The important one is being what we call the program of loans and grants. We know that historical cycle through which we mobilize resources, including from the US. Actually, I would like to thank the US for their very valuable contribution. It's a very important donor to us. And we deploy it in the form of financing. And here, one of our key priorities during the crisis is to ensure that we provide and deploy the right type of financing to countries. You mentioned earlier problem in Somalia, in Sudan. These are countries that do not have any fiscal space to borrow, and hence the critical importance of providing concessional funding or grants in order to provide the necessary financing with the right opportunities. One of our key priorities during the crisis was to ensure that everything we do is targeting. That's actually one of IFAD's competitive advantage, and what makes us different from other IFIs, that we have a single focus on agriculture, which is extremely important from a livelihood, the climate perspective, and nutrition, but also that we have this targeting capability. So in every dollar we invest is 100% going not only to agriculture, but those who are living below or within the poverty level in the country. So we do have developed expertise in this across the years. So that's one of our priorities. The second one is that we keep also emphasizing at the global community the need to strike the right balance between deploying a humanitarian response, which is very important, at the same time ensuring that we do not lose sight of the long-term needs to transform the dysfunctional food systems. There has been a food system summit that showed the weaknesses and the challenges. And it's very important that we tackle them from a development perspective, from a climate perspective, from a livelihood perspective. So it's very important. Third is to also not lose sight that we do have a food crisis, but we also have a climate crisis on our hands. So IFAD is actually very active on the nexuses between agriculture and climate, which is extremely important because we know that agriculture is highly vulnerable to climate change. We recently saw the floods in Pakistan, which is again another reminder of the pressing needs to fight climate change. But we also know that agriculture is a major contribution to the GHG emissions. About 1/3 actually of human-generated greenhouse gas emissions are coming from agriculture, and it uses actually 70% of freshwater withdrawal. So again, this is also very important. At the same time, we have been also, in addition to leveraging country system, making sure that our response is demand-driven, it's relevant, and is tackling also the climate and leaving no one behind. We have been devising dedicated and focused programs. So we launched what we call our Crisis Response Initiative. And again, I would like to thank the recent US contribution to what we call the CRI. And this is a platform through which we would like to complement the funding providing through the program of loans and grant to provide very targeted response funding to countries who are desperately in need of assistance. Most of them are actually located in Africa. Last but not least, IFAD has been using its convening power and its leading role in the agricultural finance landscape to also convene the different and try to help coordinate the different global initiatives that has been created. We know that there has been a lot of efforts from different countries and organizations to launch crisis response, which needs to be coordinated in order to ensure that we don't duplicate, that we're creating synergies. So we have been taking a leading role in different global discussions using both our country press, but also our global expertise. Thank you, over.
Great, Thoraya, thank you so much, and really for putting the spotlight on IFAD's single focus on agriculture, what makes it unique, striking the balance between and looking at the food system's weaknesses, the climate and the food crises, both of those and the tensions therein, and also the crisis response initiative and how vital that is. That's really so helpful for the framing of the discussion. I'm going to turn over to Sam again. And Sam, we recognize that some of the multilaterals, UNHCR, WFP, UNICEF, and others are lead institutions in the humanitarian space. Can you help us understand how you and the bank and IDA are coordinating with these institutions to ensure funding is released efficiently and that there's the help and support to bridge the gaps between the humanitarian and development programming, some of those trade-offs and tensions that both you and Thoraya have already mentioned?
Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate the fact that you've made reference to the discussion around humanitarian and development needs. In recent times, that divide has become quite blurred, and it's very hard to distinguish the two. And in that regard, I fully agree with Thoraya's comment that even before the present crisis, it's important to recognize that this has been a crisis that has been around with us for a long time. And therefore, those investments that are going into agriculture are really dealing with a humanitarian crisis. And so the bank works very closely with a lot of UN agencies as a matter of need rather than as a luxury. And just to drive the point home, even before the present crisis was severely aggravated by the recent invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we already had 928 million people who were severely food insecure in 2000. Now, that's an increase of about 145 million people in 2019, and this is the highest we've had since 2014. So in terms of how the World Bank has responded, very early, around about June, the World Bank put together what we termed the Global Crisis Response Framework. And this allowed us to make available as much as $30 billion over a 15-month period. Now, the rationale for that was, first of all, acknowledging that this was just one of multiple crises taking place at the same time, clearly very top on the list of crises we were dealing with. And so as part of that response, it was a three-phased approach, very similar to what I described earlier. We raise money, we manage money, and we deploy money as much as we can. In many respects, we were fortunate in terms of, that there's anything ever fortunate with crisis, but we were fortunate in the sense that we were successfully able to complete a successful replenishment of $93 billion. Now, this replenishment was timely with a lot of support from shareholders in the sense that it provided us the firepower to go and support countries as much as they in areas that they were desperately in need of. In terms of managing these resources, we certainly will continue to work with all of the UN agencies to make sure that the investments are not only going to present needs, but to development areas as well. Just to highlight this factor, with all of the significant increases in fertilizer prices, we're very concerned already about the planting season that a lot of countries are going through. So fertilizer prices are higher than they were a year ago. And so when you look at some of the agricultural markets in Southern Africa, the bread baskets, the higher costs there mean that the fiscal space for those who purchase the grain is already constrained in an area of elevated debt crisis. So one can't sort of separate the different crises. One has to work with them significantly. And therefore, in terms of how we're working, if I could just highlight 4 areas that we are doubling down significantly. Because this is a global crisis as much as we tend to localize it in particular parts of the world. So first and foremost is to avoid trade restrictions. I can fully understand that in a lot of markets, both producers and consumers, the first knee-jerk reaction is to put up trade barriers. What that does is to put sand in the wheel of making sure that resources, grain, and products are getting to places where they need. Importantly, it also sometimes, unfortunately, creates these artificial droughts or artificially increases prices at a time when the most vulnerable can least afford it. The second thing that we're investing in, and this is also to acknowledge that as much as we do whatever policy or initiatives we have, we will have those who are vulnerable in these markets who will have no other resource than grants, than concession financing. And so we are significantly investing in social safety net programs and cash transfer programs. And over the years, there's been a lot of good work, including in Africa, of disaster-linked social welfare programs, so that as we can predict droughts, we can increase financial transfers and have local communities invest in some resilience and sort of create buffers locally well in advance of the drought. The third element, which Thoraya also mentioned, we are significantly working with farmers to make sure that agricultural inputs are accessible, that they are farming, that in as much as we will have, and sadly lost a lot of lives right now, we can reduce the lives that we will lose in the years ahead by doubling down in agriculture. And then the fourth activity is really strengthening the resilience of food systems around the world. And that's making sure that they're productive, they're resource efficient, they're resilient, and this is where the investment in systems comes in. And so in closing this particular part and highlighting these 4 areas, I want to reemphasize again the importance of partnerships. The bank is a development institution. We do a relatively good job with long-term problems. We need other actors to deal with the immediate problems, to deal with the humanitarian crisis, to reach the last mile of some of the communities that our institution may simply be too big to react to. And so sitting here with Thoraya and listening to the work that they're doing is absolutely essential for many of the countries that we work in. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That backdrop of partnership, so vital, and it's really one of the cores, I think, for what we're talking about today. And thanks also for highlighting a few things that even prior to the Ukraine crisis and war, that there was already a backsliding in global hunger. That was an issue. I appreciated how you helped us outline the global crisis response framework, the focus on raising, managing, and deploying resources, and then those 4 main areas of avoiding trade restrictions, investing in the social safety nets and cash transfers, work with farmers, and strengthening resilience. That's just a very helpful framing, and we can see how to connect the dots of the work and the partnerships and institutions. Thoraya, over to you. I just was in East Africa last week, and while there, I think we all are seeing and witnessing the impact of what some may have called the 3 Cs, climate, COVID, and conflict, and how they are posing existential threats to pastoralist livelihoods and have stretched families' resources that had no more stretch in them. And, in many cases, the stories I hear and what we see in the data, 90% of their household income being spent on food, and the imminent threat of famine at scales not seen in a decade. And I know one of IFAD's strengths is working directly with communities living in poverty. Can you tell us about the communities that IFAD is working with, how the contributions to equitable food security outcomes in those communities that IFAD is investing in?
Thank you very much, Abby. And I would like actually to thank Sam for highlighting that the situation was already extremely challenging before the crisis. The crisis just accelerating some of the negative trends that we have seen. So, Abby, as you remember in my first intervention, I have emphasized the unique mandate and positioning that IFAD has, which is an exclusive focus on agriculture. And within agriculture, we're only serving and targeting the small producer and the rural households that are involved in food system that are affected by poverty or highly vulnerable to climate change. So the typical IFAD target are the most underserved regions within a country. Of course, we work only with developing countries, and within this, mostly with low-income countries, countries that are affected by fragility and conflict. And this very often, the sources of this conflict could be linked to either climate change, people who are obliged to be displaced, or, for example, of water. You mentioned the pastoralist, and I've been also visiting some places where in West Africa, where actually the fight against the water resources is the reason for the conflict. So we have been working with a lot of these communities. Something that we have been also very strong at is to aggregating the farmers, allowing them to actually organize themselves into producer organizations or water user associations. We have particularly, I'm particularly as a woman of the work that we do on gender empowerment, because a lot of these producer organizations are encouraged and pushed to have better representation, to ensure that women have equal rights and equal access to natural resources, which is not always easy. Of course, these communities very often struggle and have weak capacity. They do not have access to land, to finance, and the typical IFAD project will first identify where are the poor, what do they need, and then devise a comprehensive package of intervention that allow us to address both financial and non-financial constraints. So unlike World Bank and IDA, we are not, for example, in the business of large infrastructure. So actually our work nicely complement, for example, the work they do. They will, for example, build a power plant in a country or a highway linking the capital to a rural area, and then that will come with the last mile infrastructure, be it feeder road, be it storage facilities for the small produce markets, slaughters, you mentioned earlier, the livestock. So this is the complementarity. And I mean, I understand if I'm working for the State Department or any other department with the US, I would actually question the global landscape and the large number of IFAs. But I would like to reassure you that between ourselves, we do a good job actually in coordinating. And actually that very happened at the country level. So very often we sit together at what we call the donor groups. I know that, for example, IFAD is a member of most of the agriculture donor working group, where we discuss what are the projects that we have in the pipeline, how can we leverage on each other work, and how each institution can come with its own competitive advantage. So just to give an example, we have recently had the project with the African Development Bank in Nigeria, where they invested in the large infrastructure to create what we call agro-processing zones. And then IFAD leveraged on its extensive experience working with producer organization, with rural poor, organizing them to actually connect them to these agro-processing zones, so that what these large multinationals or large local companies who will have business opportunity can be linked to smallholders. And just also to clarify a little bit, our approach has always been focusing on, one, increasing sustainable production. And I want to emphasize the word sustainable, because it's not only about increasing production and productivity, but making sure that it does not actually hint under the environment in which we are operating. So we are very active on the issue of efficiency of water use, on reducing methane emission, for example, from livestock. I know that the US is quite supportive to this kind of initiative. We have been using biodigesters. For those of you who may not know what they are, because I did not until I joined IFAD, these are structures where basically you process organic waste and it generates biogas then used, for example, for cooking or for other purposes, and then nutrient-rich slurry that you could use as a fertilizer. So these are, again, we want to be more than a simple financiers, and that's the strength of IFAD, that we can bring not only our financing, but our technical expertise, our commitment to empower and give a voice also to the small producers, to the indigenous groups, to women, to youth, to all these groups who do not necessarily have a voice at the global community. So we are here actually to make sure that whatever we do, they are taken care of and that they are not left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thoraya. You already got to the next question about the coordination with other institutions such as the African Development Bank. Thank you so much, and really appreciate how you highlighted and called out the focus on gender, on the access to the small producers, those the last mile that you've already talked about, and the complementarity and focus on sustainable approaches, sustainability part as well. Super helpful and appreciated in how we're looking at the complementarity and to what Sam said on the partnerships as well, and how the whole ecosystem could be working better, both in the response and the future orientation. Sam, I'm going to come back to you now. We know that urgent funding and action are needed now, today, at this moment, to help communities and families survive the hunger crisis. We've all been acknowledging that, as well as to build this more just and sustainable food systems that Thoraya and you've already talked about, that do not harm the planet and further harm those least responsible, the already vulnerable people who are least responsible for climate change, who are experiencing the disproportionate impacts. The World Bank recently announced, as you mentioned, the support of up to $30 billion in existing and new projects to respond to the crisis in that range of investments that you talked about, encouraging food and fertilizer production, enhanced food systems, facilitating greater trade, and supporting vulnerable households. While the focus on hunger is welcome, how is the bank managing to ensure it's responding holistically to this multiplicity of factors that countries are currently facing that are driving hunger and poverty? Is there an opportunity cost to shifting resources towards the hunger crisis and away from other priorities? And if so, how do we mitigate that?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that question. I mean, that one is super challenging, because even though I celebrate the $93 billion that we raised for IDA, there's been immediate recognition that that's not going to be enough for the multiplicity of crises that we're dealing with across hunger, the debt vulnerability crisis, human capital deficiencies that we have. And so one of the things that the bank does in anticipation of these resource constraints and the challenges that we have about deciding between two necessary things that need to be done is actually over the last year to go through a very deliberate process of negotiating policy commitments with our shareholders. So the last package that we had about 41 policy commitments, and they covered food security, resilience, social protection. We have 5 special things that we're dealing with this particular year: human capital development, climate, gender and development, agility, economic transformation. But, you know, it's one thing to come up with these wonderful frameworks. It's the implementation that makes the difference. And for this, and this I'll admit right away, is one of the most challenging aspects of development. Thoraya makes it sound really easy in her remarks with the African Development Bank and the World Bank and others, and that's because she's such a diplomat. I fail lamentably every single day in that regard. But look, the reality is there's a lot of well-intentioned agencies out there. Right now, in any one country, the role that Thoraya made reference to donor committees couldn't be much more relevant. And just to give you a sense, you know, we've been looking at the donor landscape and how it's changed. In 2000, we had 145 bilateral entities, a large number, but not impossible. Fast forward to today, we have 400 different agencies that are working in countries. On average, you're finding that a single country might have, over the same period, actually, I just remember the number, a single country on average had about 40 agencies that they were dealing with. Today, there are 90 agencies who are working in a particular country. So that immediately increases the transaction costs. Right? Now, when it comes to implementation, in order for us to be effective, that local coordination becomes really important. So that when large institutions like the bank come and invest a significantly large volume of financing, say on famine, It's making sure that we're sitting down with these agencies and making sure that we are coordinating our effort. But this allows me to also emphasize that in as much as we tend to immediately focus on how much resources are available, an equally important element of development is the analytical work, the knowledge part of it. And so when we have an entity like IFAD find ways in which we can be much more efficient in terms of utilizing or generating biogas, for example, then the work of the bank is made easier by making sure that we're stretching this across the region as a whole. I make reference to that to transition, not to avoid your question, because it is absolutely right. We've got the 30 billion. How can we be much more efficient? I would say that there are 3 steps that we're taking. The first step is to invest in coordination at the country level. The second step is to make sure that we're deploying knowledge across our programs as efficiently and effectively as we can. The third step is making sure that we're designing our projects in manner that is flexible, allows us to respond in real time. So, for example, in Pakistan, just recently, we all have seen the devastating visions of flooding exacerbating an already food insecure system. We now have 1.9 million people who now immediately need resources. FAO is telling us that nearly 500,000 of these people are one step away from catastrophic food insecurity. So in that sort of response, we then now need to make sure that the bank is working, the World Bank is working with the government to repurpose any resources that are already in country. And then once the immediate crisis is dealt with, we then can resort to some of the windows that we have, such as the crisis response window, which will then reimburse some of the projects that were used upfront to make sure that the programs that were already established for health and education, from which maybe flood resources were taken away, are reimbursed. So that over a 5-year period, you will see that in the immediacy of the crisis, resources are being diverted to deal with famine, to deal with flood. There is a mechanism to reimburse that so that we can then get back to the track that was originally envisioned. The challenge for an institution like the bank is that during that period, people will see the immediacy of resources being diverted from longer term challenges. The news cycle will be such that when those resources are being reimbursed, we've moved on to the next crisis. But that's something that is par for the course. You take that criticism as it comes, knowing fully well that in the ongoing discussion with government, there is a constant reassurance of the bank's long-term investment into longer-term development challenges. That said, and I'll finish by saying that the biggest difference, I mean, I've been with the bank 20 years. The last 3 years have shown me things I've never experienced before. That in the past, even the way we managed our balance sheet was on the premises of a major global crisis every 10 years. Financial crisis, 2007, 2008, and you've got this recovery period, you rebuild your buffers. Over the last 3-4 years, we've had a major global crisis almost every year hit the institution. There's been no recovery spike, and that makes managing the institution challenging. But certainly what keeps us going is whatever challenges we have as global institution does not compare at all to the challenges that your families in poor countries are facing, where they have no buffers, they have no recourse, there is a drought they're dealing with, they don't have the connectivity to continue to raise revenue even in the midst of COVID restrictions that they've had to deal with. So that keeps you going, as challenging as it is. And so we will continue to come back to every one of our shareholders. They will tell us 10 times they have no additional resources. We will come back a 15th time. The need is that much higher. But it does also leave us with the responsibility of making sure that we are innovative with the type of financing that we are able to attract, that we're going to continue to going back to the market. We're going to continue stretching our balance sheet because the need requires us to do that at this particular time. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. And really, I appreciate how you you kind of brought us to the end, that compounding crises, the learning that institutions have had to reckon with from some of the historical trends, and the focus on complementarity, efficiencies, balancing crisis response, design flexibility to investing in the long term, all fundamental, and that not giving up to mobilize the resources that are required for those whose voices are not heard, who are not where those causing the problems and are experiencing them so acutely. So thank you for that. I know there's huge interest from audience for questions, so I'd like to open it up there. I know Thoraya and Sam are able to respond. I am still having my challenges in seeing the chat box. So let's open it up, and I will see how we're doing in the Q&A. Let's see. Okay. I apologize. I don't know, Sam or Thoraya, are you able to see?
I can see some of the questions.
Chat?
Yeah.
Oh.
Actually,
Okay,
I'm
sorry, my moderation will be a little awkward. Thoraya, why don't you come in first, and we'll go over to Sam.
Sure. I'm happy actually to take it. Actually, there's a question about how IFAD and IDA are actually ensuring that they're accountable to donors. Importantly, how do these institutions ensure accountability to people in the country's community they work with, and in terms of impact? So I'll start with this question, if I may. I said earlier in my intervention that one of IFAD priorities to ensure that those who are actually living in remote area, who live below the poverty rate, underserved group like women, indigenous people, have a voice. And as part of our project design process, and also during implementation, we do have, of course, the necessary processes in place to consult actually these different groups. And the way we see our IFAD project is a co-construction between the beneficiaries and IFAD. So we spend a lot of time during design consulting the community, ensuring that they are actors of their own destiny, and that whatever is being designed in terms of intervention is addressing their needs and is the outcome of a community vision and approach. Of course, while providing the necessary support for them to be able to articulate it. So that's the part about how we consult them. There are also, of course, the safeguards part, ensure that everything is published online, that anybody who has a problem with the project can always actually flag and share his concerns. Equally important is the accountability. And here I would like to highlight something that is quite unique in IFAD. So unlike other development institutions who limit actually their reporting to donors to the results are what we call the outcomes achieved through the project, thanks to pulled out from their monitoring and evaluation system, IFAD conducts rigorous impact assessment on 15% of its projects. And this is being used to aggregate. What does it mean? It means that we are able to see the effect of our intervention. And I'm happy actually to share with you the figures that we released last week for the IFAD 11 impact assessment, which is a 3-year cycle where we provided 3.5 billion. So thanks to IFAD financing, we have managed to have 77 million people improve their livelihood and their income by more than 10%. Actually, the results show that the difference between those who have benefited from IFAD intervention, those did not, is about 23% increase in income. And that's for us is very important, because I go back to the intervention of Congressman Phillips, who emphasized earlier the need to measure. Measuring is important because not only it allows us to be accountable and also be able to show our donors, in addition to the fact that we are leveraging for each dollar they give us, we fund total project of about 8 times the amount that we are providing, but also learn from the type of impacts. Through the work that we are doing, we can identify what interventions make more sense, what intervention will allow us to have a better return in terms of development results. And that could be either on the social, on the income aspect, but also on resilience. So we are, for example, doing a lot of work currently on measuring resilience and developing tools that allow us to measure what resilience means. And that boils down to what Sam said. We're living in a different world. And then, unlike Sam, I think this pace of crisis will continue. The old world where we had the crisis every 10 years is gone in my view. But so between the conflict and the global trends, we will see more crisis, hence the increasing importance of building resilience for these communities. There has been also a question about the support to ecosystems, building, restoration to agroecology. And I'm happy to report, and I thought that I emphasized enough the sustainability in my intervention earlier. But I would like to reassure whoever asked the question that we are very active in this space. Actually, we conducted recently a stocktake exercise showing that 60% of our projects support agroecology and other nature-based solutions. So that's something where we are very active. We try to promote, for example, payment for ecosystem restoration, low carbon livestock development. One area where we have invested also significantly is the reduction of food loss. About 14% of the food produced is lost between the farm and the market. I'm not even talking about waste, which is more a problem for developing countries. And that is extremely relevant in the context of food security, because this food, if we can preserve it, if we can store it properly, we'll be able to save it and also save on the water and the land that is today used for food that is not benefiting anybody. So thank you, and I'm happy to come back if there are other questions. Over.
Thanks, Thoraya. It's great on the accountability, the metrics, and the approaches. Sam, why don't you first start off, pick up where Thoraya left off on the accountability question as well from World Bank's perspective, and then we'll be able to come to another.
Okay. No, thank you very much. I certainly agree with everything that Thoraya has said. Accountability is really about how you design your operations, how you involve the communities that you're involved in, and how you deliver on those projects. I think the one thing that I'd like to add to her response, and certainly applies to IDA, is that this is a repeat business. Every 3 years, we have to come back to our shareholders and make the case afresh for additional resources. And part of that process is making sure that we're able to actually demonstrate where our result, how we delivered on the previous replenishment. There is always an IDA retrospective that is written detailing all of the results that were achieved, everything that we failed to achieve, and that's discussed. Even the replenishment process itself, it takes place over a 12-month period with 4 replenishment meetings. And I can tell you, each one of those meetings, the bank is being held to account on the volumes of resources, what it's used for, which sectors, what results are being achieved. Alongside that donor conversation, we also have a conversation with civil society through our IDA forums. And during the IDA 20 replenishment process, when we went fully virtual, we had significantly large numbers of civil society, and we would sit for an hour, 2 hours at a time to respond to all of these questions. In addition to those formal forums, we would have bilateral sessions with some of our active networks of civil society, and they've added tremendous value. That's the governance around it, and certainly for everything that IDA does, we have IDA deputies from every one of our shareholding or donor countries that we are accountable to. That is merely on the fundraising side with donors. Keeping in mind that now we're also going to market, we sit down with all of our rating agencies to make sure that our financial instruments are robust, they're sound, they maintain the integrity of the institution that we have. But ultimately, our accountability is about what we do in country. Is it the right thing? And I fully acknowledge that we, as an institution, we have not always got it right. We've made investments that have revealed that our gender-based system or anti-gender-based violence mechanisms were not strong enough. And that is where entities such as Oxfam and others highlighting these weaknesses and learning from that process means that we will continue to strengthen our governance process. The challenge with development is that sometimes when we over-engineer the governance process, it does then result in a longer project preparation time than what I know our task teams would require. But for some certain issues that are really important, I think it's worth highlighting. While I'm still talking, let me also just comment on the fact that there were two additional questions that are related. The first one is certainly on our approach to developing sustainable agricultural systems and making sure that they're not detrimental to our SDGs. I think Thoraya provided a response that speaks to both the banks and the IFAD's approach here. A lot of these things take time. You build it into your results matrix, you measure it, you learn, you adjust. And therefore, anybody on this call who has examples where this is not working as robustly or as ideally as we would like it, feedback to the institution is certainly welcome. And I'll tell you, coming from Zambia, I was very skeptical of this institution when I joined, having gone through structural adjustment in Zambia. This was the devil incarnate, But having walked the corridors of the institution for the last 20 years, I haven't found a room somewhere of people who are seeking to do harm to the world. I've found a lot of professionals looking to learn, and I'm yet to come across times when new knowledge has been provided, hasn't been used. And then the final question here that I see is, can I comment on how the elevated food and fertilizer prices have made debt sustainability challenges in middle-income countries more acute, and elaborate how the World Bank is balancing the twin crisis of food and debt? Look, this is really challenging. Before the war in Ukraine, the debt levels in all of our countries had risen significantly. We're now at a point where about 55% of all of the IDA countries are facing some level of debt vulnerability. We have, and the challenge we have is that unlike, say, 20 years ago, when a lot of the foreign debt was from a small group of Paris Club members, the sources of debt have become much, much more diverse. So coming up with a global package is near impossible at this stage. But it's not something that we have given up on, certainly. One of the ways in which we're doing this, starting 2 years ago, was to introduce a sustainable debt financing policy, the SDFP. For the first time, every single year, the World Bank has a discussion about debt with every single one of our IDA countries that is facing some measure of debt vulnerability. And every single one of them has to come up with 3 policy actions to make sure that they're doing something to improve their debt vulnerability. The bank has gone further by making all of this information available publicly. So there's now a website where you can go to, you can look at every single country, every single conversation on debt. You can also see, in prior years, which policy actions they've been able to deliver. So this is going on, and we see this as foundational for making sure that we're providing financing in a sustainable manner, regardless of whether the crisis they will face is related to food, to energy, or something else. But importantly, we have, in order to address this question of balance, is make sure that our country directors in every single country are having this twin conversation all the time. We have front-loaded our financing as much as 30% in addition to what countries would have been able to get in a regular replenishment. We have activated the early response window within our crisis response window, and even as I speak, over the last 2 months, we've had more than 20 countries apply for this additional financing to the tune of about 750 million. So in short, in response to your question, it's all systems go. It's really making sure we've got a team, and this goes back to the flexibility I referred to earlier. having global teams that do nothing but debt, working with our countries, having teams that do nothing but food and agriculture, work with the same country, and the work of our country directors in countries to make sure that we are balancing the provision of resources, the utilization of knowledge, and our partnerships with others to make sure that countries have these resources available. But it is challenging, and certainly the bank will not always get it right. And we count on feedback, ongoing feedback from civil society, from our shareholders, from our countries, to make sure that we continue to improve where we are wanting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for getting ahead of those questions. I'm going to turn to one question first to Thoraya and then back to you, Sam, before we have some closing reflections. Let me read it here. The questioners noted Sam mentioned more resources needed, but said there have been a lot of proposals recently to increase the amount of assistance IFIs can offer, such as special drawing rights through the development banks and reforms aimed at increasing the lending capacity of the MDBs. Can the World Bank and IFAD continue to rely on regular replenishments and capital increases to meet the needs of the current crisis and ensure we don't lose any further ground in meeting the SDGs? Or are your institutions moving toward pursuing these other mechanisms as well? Thoraya, why don't we come to you? We'll come back to Sam and then have some closing reflections.
Thank you very much, Abby. That's a very good question. So obviously, what we call in IFAD the core, which are the contribution from the member states, will remain the backbone of our financial architecture. This is very important. And I think Sam highlighted that we are in the business, he said it very nicely, to raise money, mobilize money, and deploy money. So for us to be able to leverage any money, we will still need the member state contribution and also their support. One thing that we need to keep in mind that both IDA and also IFAD is today a rated agency, and our ability to raise and mobilize and leverage the funding that we receive highly depends also on member state support. So we will continue to advocate for increasing core contribution, and I'm hoping that with today's discussion, we helped actually at least make a case for the relevance of the work we do and also the huge needs that we are facing. At the same time, we are also aware that we cannot ask any donor to increase their contribution by 6, 7, 10 times, which because the needs are huge and they are increasing they're compounded by all this crisis that we are facing. So we have been actually pursuing different routes in IFAD. One of them is increasingly to leverage from the private sector. So we were mainly, for example, sourcing loans from bilaterals or donors. Today we have done private placements through bonds to institutional investors. In addition, we have launched our private sector financing program, where we also would like to attract and assemble more private sector financing, because we realize that with the 300 to 350 billion needed annually over the next decade to achieve healthy people, planet, and economy, we cannot rely only on donors. So that's also something that we're pursuing. We have been also trying to leverage on other innovative forms of financing. You mentioned SDR. So yes, we are part of the conversation, although there's still a lot of clarity about how the SDRs, whether they will be used by the IFIs or the countries, and that has implication for the efficiency. And again, it would be very important that IFIs were given the means and the resources to scale up what we do, because through time we have shown also our ability to invest and deliver results. And as Sam said, even though the donors are very reluctant, we will come back and try to make the case, because it's very important. So I would say yes for donor increase, but increasingly also looking for other sources of innovative financing, be it blended, be it regular finance, be it guarantees, for other I would say type of players. For example, in IFAD, we're leading now this public development bank platform, where we're trying also to leverage the balance sheet of public development banks, be it national, regional. We have been doing a lot of interesting work to catalyze money from diaspora and the remittances. That's a 500 billion of funding. That's more than ODA, and we have done some very innovative work in this area that will continue. Maybe just a question in the chat that I would like to address very quickly in 1 minute. What can colleagues listening to us working for Congress do? One, let's please keep agriculture and food security high on the agenda. let's not forget about the importance of this sector, not only to tackle the food crisis that we are currently facing, but also other important issues like poverty, hunger, climate. It's very important that we build the case. The ODA for agriculture over the past decade has been hovering 5 to 6%. We need to do more and better. Second, better coordination. Unlike Simon, I think the coordination among the multilaterals and some of bilaterals is going relatively well. What I agree with him is the large number of initiatives that we've been seeing. So my other player, if you have someone coming to with a nice idea and a nice story, your first question would be, have you consulted the key players in this entity? Try to push for more coordination. And of course, last but not least, I think, for example, agriculture and food security is becoming an increasingly complex issue that goes beyond the Ministry of Agriculture. For nutrition, we need the Ministry of Health. We need the Ministry of Environment. So pushing also for this cross-country coordination is extremely important. Thank you, Over.
All right, thank you. You touched on so much: the coordination, innovation, diversification, scale, keeping food security high on the agenda, and more. So thank you. Sam, over to you if you will respond to the final question and any final reflections before we wrap up.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has really been a very helpful conversation in just thinking through what we do. One thing I did want to respond to the question is that as an institution, the World Bank welcomes the MDB report that was produced recently about our options for further leveraging our financial resources. It's a report we're taking seriously. We've devoted a significant amount of senior management time to look at every single one of the options in the report. We will be meeting with our board of directors very soon to continue that conversation. And the reason we welcome it is that it is consistent with the manner in which I certainly run the corporate finance team within the World Bank. First and foremost, we are a bank. We want to make sure that we are maximizing our financial capacity for our borrowers as much as we can. And I say to my staff, we are financial plumbers, right? We go around the house to make sure that water is flowing as quickly and as swiftly as possible. The pressure is right, but not too much that pipes burst, and not too low that you can't get your shower done. Look, to Tharaya's point, and I fully agree with her, there is a core that's involved in development work. The reason being that in as much as we can go to market and leverage our financing, there are a core of our countries who are FCV states who need grants. And there's only so much of corporate finance alchemy one can run to raise market resources at market prices and convert that to grant financing. And that's the role that the core, as Tharaya put it, of donor financing makes sense. We will continue to rely on that. We will continue our commitment to use that and leverage it as effectively as we can. But we're also very mindful that the generosity of our largest shareholders has itself been tested with multiple crises. COVID hit everybody alike. And I'm particularly worried about the cold winter that's going to hit Europe and the implications for resources that will be made available. So sadly for a large shareholder like the US, it does mean that people will come back because they do need that anchor, they do need that support. But this will not diminish in any way our commitment to make sure that we are exploring and stretching our balance sheet as much as we can. This accounts for some of the financial innovations we embedded in IDA 20. For countries that are at moderate risk, we converted them from getting 50% grants and 50% credits to 50-year credits. What that does is make sure that for those countries that are able to repay the loans, they can do so to the benefit of those that are less able to do that. We introduced short maturity loans to make sure that if countries are able to invest them in investment that are able to bring a return much faster, we're able to do that. We're doubling down on investments with the private sector. We're paying close attention to the private sector window, which over the last since the last replenishment, we've been able to use 2.5 billion of donor financing to leverage 10 billion in private sector investments across the globe. So we're doing all of those things because we're well aware that the new normal of multiple crises in any given year will continue to stretch our balance sheet. I think in closing, I just want to sort of highlight that sort of three key messages from me. Many, first of all, to endorse all of the messages that Thoraya said in her remarks. So the first message is acknowledging that the multiplicity of crises will continue to stay with us. Their severity will be significant. Food is top of that list, but certainly not the only item on that list. The second element is that the need for financing could not be greater, and therefore IFIs will continue to explore all possible options. We will continue to call on donor financing, but we will also continue to explore market-based financing in partnership with others. We don't have a choice there, simply because the available resources, even with the ongoing generosity, will not be enough to see us through the crisis. And then the final point is not to forget that is, as much as we are focused on present crisis, there are longer term development needs, which if we don't pay attention to, will increase the volume of immediate crisis that comes up. So we will continue to invest in human capital, in health, in education, in access to access to education facilities for kids, gender diversity, and others. Those long-term problems, dealing with them is essential to dealing with today's crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Those were really just critical points to end on. The multiplicity, compounding of crises as our new norm, and obviously food amongst those high at the top. The need for financing couldn't be greater, and what that means to the institutions and all, and not forgetting those longer term development needs, because that affects the today and the tomorrow. So we have to be doing both and to have just a brighter future for all. And I can't help but say that the financial plumber image will stick with me too, Sam. So thank you for sharing that. I want to wrap up now, and thank you so much, Thoraya and Sam, both, for the robust discussion about the work your institutions are doing to respond to the growing crises. And the IFIs have a critical role to play. I think everyone here today agrees and knows that, and we just so welcome your engagement on these important issues. I also want to thank again Congressman Phillips, who was with us, as well as Congressman Rutherford, who was not able to be with us today, and all of their staff for their leadership on spreading awareness about the role of the IFIs and how it intersects with the important work they're doing in Congress to address the hunger crisis. And it was just a pleasure to be with you all today. I look forward, on behalf of Oxfam and all of us, continuing the work with all of you on these absolutely vital issues. Thank you all so very much.
Great. Thank you very much.